Hi, welcome to Live and Local, a special edition. This is the No Baloney City Council Hour, right here. No baloney, folks. Hopefully we're going to have a spirited discussion. There's going to be no opening statements or closing statements. Candidates are free to answer my questions in 10 seconds or longer, 5 minutes, but if they get out of hand on the baloney, I'm going to whack the podium here. They're welcome to talk to each other, comment on each other's answers, anything that comes to their minds to, enlarge the discussion in any way. I'd like to say at the outset that I'm sorry that Brandon Ross could not be here. His father passed away, and we send our condolences to Brandon and his family. Also, please save your calls until at least after 7 o'clock. We have a lot of questions already prepared. People have called me, and I'm sure the candidates will have questions for each other. Before we actually get going, I want to start and introduce them from one end to the other. Our at-large candidates, Mike O'Donnell, incumbent, Leah Cohen, Ernie Lehman, incumbent, John Robertson, and in District B, Connie Champion. And her opponent, as I said, Brandon Ross, who could not be here with us tonight. Okay, so without further ado, let's start the No Baloney City Council Candidates Hour. And my first question is for our mayor, Ernie Lehman. Now, Ernie, I read a letter to the editor that said that you are so well known and beloved that, like Cher and Madonna, you are known simply by your first name, Ernie. Now that's quite something, really is. Cher and Madonna. Down at Stan's Barbershop, they're saying you're going to win by about 2,000 votes. So how about this? If it's a cold, rainy day, or even snowing on Election Day, why don't you issue a public service announcement and ask your elderly and infirm supporters to stay home and not risk catching the cold or flu that's going around? What do you say?
I suspect that they're such loyal supporters that they wouldn't pay any attention. They'd go vote anyway.
They'd go vote anyway.
I think they
How
would.
do you feel about being put on that pedestal of Cher and Madonna? Isn't that quite something?
I think that probably is somewhat inappropriate.
Inappropriate.
I think that's probably right.
Well, I loved that letter. I thought it was very... Oh, you took my bet. All right. Well, there, we've got our first action of the night. Now, I say 2,000 votes ahead of the third place finisher. All right? All right.
Oh, we got that qualified.
Well, that's to win. To win, you're going to be first or second.
That's right.
First
Okay.
or second by 2,000 votes. Okay. Well, John, since you were...
Who's going to hold the money?
Well, we'll have the staff do that. But thank you, John, for jumping in like that.
All right.
I'm glad somebody took my action. You said, and correct me if I'm wrong, at the Gazette KCRG forum, that Ernie epitomized everything good about a mayor. Was that sort of what you said?
I think that was a bit of an overstatement.
Did you say it?
I gave Ernie a compliment.
No, is that about what you said?
I said that he, if I recall correctly, but I certainly wasn't trying to slather him with compliments.
Oh, come on.
but,
That's all right. Do it.
Yeah, I mean, if that's what you said.
I made a nice compliment because I think Ernie does have qualities that you need to have in a mayor. There's been this talk on one of the radio stations in town that if the challengers are elected, that we'll make Steve Canner the mayor. And that's not going to happen. It's not anything bad necessarily about Steve, but the kind of person that needs to be the mayor is somebody that has broad popularity, has the ability to work with everybody on the council, tends to fall into the middle on the council spectrum so that he or she can work effectively with everybody, and runs a good meeting and gives good proclamations.
So you're happy with his job as mayor, but yet you're running for one of the at-large seats that he's also running for, and that's kind of confusing to me.
Well, with all due respect to Ernie, the mayor's job in Iowa City is essentially a ceremonial position. They don't have the kind of power that typically we associate with the word mayor. And so it's essentially a symbolic kind of title. And in that respect, sure, let's make Ernie mayor for life in terms of all of that.
Mayor for life, you heard it here first. Okay, mayor.
I don't want him to have a vote on everything.
Oh, I see, I see. Well, let me ask you this. Do you think maybe we could do a better job in the way we pick our mayor instead of a backroom deal amongst the people who, or front room deal, depending, amongst the 7 people who are in office at the end of the year? How about if we had something like the top vote getter becomes mayor, or every 2 years you vote on a mayor? How would you feel about a system like that?
I kind of like the idea of a popular election for mayor.
Popular election for mayor.
Yeah.
Leah, you agree with that? Popular election for mayor?
It's
One thing I've been pushing in my campaign. We have our charter coming up in a couple of years, and I'd really like to see that. As I recall, or had been told, years ago we did that. And that isn't any reflection on Ernie at all, whether
course not.
We
Just 'cause
elect
he's
a
the sitting
mayor or
mayor.
not. You know, I just think that it would maybe help bring people into the process a little bit.
Do you think we need a strong mayor form of government instead of the city manager council form that we have now?
Well, I think with where Cedar Rapids is at, which is a totally different form of government, I believe is fairly expensive government. So I think that citizens of this town, I think that when that charter comes up in a couple of years, and hopefully long before that it's started to look at, there probably will be some changes in how we do business in our city.
All right, how many of you, just up or down, would like to see the mayor decided by popular vote instead of the way it's presently decided?
I could handle it by popular vote if the reason I have with the problem with them, do you run for mayor or do you run for city council? Because if you run for mayor and somebody beats you, then you're not on the city council. So, I mean, I have problems, how you're going to work that out. I don't have any problems with the mayor being elected by popular vote if it's the mayor doesn't have any more power than they do now. And then, do they run for city council? Like you said, the top vote getter? I don't know.
All right, well, that's just a possibility I'm throwing out. John, let me ask you another question.
Okay.
Now, you were very big on these charter amendments,
Yes.
Which were thrown out. Is your campaign still looking for a message, or did that derail you in any way, or what do you think about that?
It's never been the central part of my campaign. I think my central position has always been to make city government more accessible, more respectful, more open to community involvement. I've always talked primarily about the need for a council that reaches out to people more effectively, that holds forums, that televises all the meetings, that puts the council packets out on the web and out in public for people to have access to, that kind of stuff. That's been the central part of my campaign from day one. I support the charter amendments. I think they should be on the ballot. I think they will be on the ballot, just not this ballot. That's, we're still moving forward in that direction also.
Would you fire Steve Atkins today if you were in the majority on the council?
I would not.
Anybody here think they would? Anybody want to entertain that notion? Since a lot of people love to bash Steve, I just wondered if we had any budding majority here that as part of their campaign would like to just,
One thing there is, with this council that may be going on, there's a possibility of retirement of Steve Atkins, of retirement of the chief of police. We've got charter amendments coming up. There's some major things that will be going on in the next 2 to 4 years with this council. And I think citizens have to kind of think about that too as we go forward with this election. There's heavy possibility of those sorts of things.
Ernie, is that really why you're running instead of staying home with your grandkids? Because you think Steve Atkins is going to be retiring in the next 4 years and you don't want any, shall we say, lunatics to be in charge of who's choosing the next city manager?
I haven't really.
Lunatics was a little strong. Let me rephrase that.
I haven't really spent
pretty
much.
What?
I haven't spent much time thinking about that. But
You haven't.
Steve has been here, I think, close to 15 years.
Yeah.
And this is kind of remarkable because I believe the average city manager stays in a job for about 8 years.
Mm-hmm.
And in a community with the amount of public input that we have and the amount of disagreement that we have, it would seem to me that the tenure of a city manager would probably be less than the national average, and yet in the case of Mr. Atkins, it's almost twice as long as the average. My suspicion is that Mr. Atkins at some point is probably going to either retire or go into teaching or whatever. I have no idea.
I hope Kirkwood or the university gives him a nice big black blazer like we do. That's a pretty sweet deal. Does anybody think we should give him maybe an Escort or a Saturn that would get better mileage? Anybody want to go on record here tonight as saying that?
I think you ought to be able to draw a vehicle out of the motor pool just like other people that need
It's a nice car. Too bad it got repoed that day out in that restaurant in Coralville.
Yeah.
John, would you want to have the chief of police under more scrutiny than possibly he is now?
Absolutely. Not the chief so much personally. It's not about personalities. It's about the process. We need to exercise more scrutiny over law enforcement practices. We need to take a much more proactive approach to the kinds of decisions that get made about what kinds of offenses we're going to target, how we're going to target them, what the solutions are that we're seeking, that sort of thing. And if Chief Winklehake can adapt himself and move forward in that direction, I think that's great, and more power to him. And if he can't, well, then we'll look at that.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting. Anybody else want to offer an opinion on the chief before we move on?
I think the chief does an outstanding job. You know, you can criticize anybody for any job they do. You're sworn to uphold the laws of the state of Iowa, as we are when we're sworn in as counselors. And we keep calling policies. Policies is chewing gum and throwing it on the sidewalk. Marijuana is presently illegal in the state. And until it's legalized, if it ever is, you have to enforce the law.
Who's saying we shouldn't?
No, well, what I'm
not
saying,
aware
John,
of that. I mean that talk has come up in this campaign,
Yeah.
but I'm not aware of any candidate that suggested that or made a part of their campaign that we ought to legalize marijuana.
No, we're talking, John, writing a ticket and letting people go.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that there are substantial abuses related to alcohol, related to marijuana, domestic violence, sexual abuse. And
But-
I wonder where do you draw
Well,
the line?
How many of you would be in favor of simply having marijuana as simply a citation?
Well, I would.
Anybody else?
I don't want to build a $33 million jail.
Does anybody else?
Gary, I think that we do that right now. When it comes to alcohol,
Many types.
Public intox, possession, and whatever, we give citations now. We don't put those folks in the jail unless there's some reason for their own safety or the safety of others. So we don't just arrest people and throw them in jail.
John, what do you think?
Well, we do that also with some marijuana smokers that get caught. The issue isn't that they get a ticket and they go home and they break open the piggy bank. They're still subject to 2 days in jail. They still lose their driver's licenses. They still have a minimum $250 fine. They still have to go to treatment. They have all the
Now,
same
is
legal sanctions.
Is all this in state code and we can't do anything about it?
That's
or not?
exactly correct. The only difference is that instead of taking them over there and filling our jail up for the night, they pose no threat to anybody. That's why they get let out the next morning very perfunctorily with no bond, no nothing. We just send them home with a ticket in order to appear in court.
Who are you talking about? The alcohol abusers or the marijuana users?
I'm talking about anybody that doesn't pose a threat to the community.
I don't think the police take anybody from downtown to the jail unless they pose a threat. And I don't have that piece of paper that I had with me one day at the city council meeting, but on homecoming weekend there were 35 arrests, and 16 of them were involved in some kind of altercation. 2 were involved in robberies, 2 were called by the bars to haul
I think
them
we
out.
can all agree, obviously, that anybody who's a threat, quote unquote, to anybody else should be put down there. And it seems, John, that you are, from this little group here, the only one who would be in favor of a simple citation and possibly not putting people in jail for the marijuana or
For the overnight.
public intox overnight if they don't seem to be a threat.
they're
And
not-
that's a close call for the police, though.
It is, but they're
Well,
not.
I'm down in the middle of this, and we just went through a football weekend, so I have a couple interesting little stories to tell about the football weekend with it. And this is another reason why I think I'm good representative for this community, because I'm always in the middle of all this stuff, it seems like. But for instance, on Friday night downtown, in my restaurant bar, I had two kids, well, there were actually three of them. Two had a beer and they had fake IDs. And as it turned out, after all this, I find out the gist of it. But anyway, these two kids were arrested and taken to jail, and I couldn't figure out what on earth are these kids arrested for. They weren't drunk or didn't appear drunk or out of control or anything. The police were just in on bar checks. And anyway, so after these kids were arrested, I asked the officers, and plain and simply, he said to me, well, they lied about the fake. So that's why they went to jail. Now and I said to him, guys, you got a busy night ahead filling that jailhouse up.
Where
you
was
know?
this? Where were they arrested?
This was out at Bo James, or in
Okay.
front of Bo James, actually, they
Did
were.
they spend the night in jail?
I don't know if they spent the night in jail or
doubt
not,
it.
but they were taken to jail.
Right.
I
And
don't, and maybe they're
They-
booked there
Right.
and then let go.
So
But I
did they
couldn't
have to post
understand-
bond? If they didn't have enough bond, would they have to spend the
Well,
night
they
in
had
jail
a
for
kid
having
with them.
phony
These were
ID?
kids from Chicago area, and the other kid that was with them was kind of, I tried to, help him as much as I could, because he really didn't even know. He had come, they were friends, he had come here with them. He didn't even know the address of the apartment they were staying at. He was just kind of lost, like, what on earth am I going to do?
Well,
Are you sure he only had one beer?
I don't know if they had one beer or not. I have no idea if they had, but they weren't causing trouble, and they walked out and appeared okay.
One
I don't
thing-
think they fought or anything.
One thing
But-
that has happened with the jail in about the last year to year and a half has been that because of the overcrowding issue, the sheriff has been able to manage an informal agreement with all the police departments that when they get people like that, they book them in, and it's called catch and release. They book them in, they assure themselves of who they've got, et cetera, and then they cut them loose either for the next day or some future court date. That's a new thing. It's not driven by the issue so much of whether they're a threat or not, because 2 years ago, 3 years ago, they spend the night in jail.
So
But
they
you
get
know
out
what I mean.
now. Are they out in a matter of a couple
Well,
hours? See, I didn't
Yeah.
know that to even tell this other
they
kid
would-
that.
Typically,
You know, what-
many of them would be. I have a friend who was breaking
Okay.
up a fight in a bar, and the police got him mixed up with the aggressors. He went and they cut him loose. He was back in the where we were within 15 minutes.
All right, Leah, excuse me. You own Bo James downtown? Let me ask you something. That's a restaurant and bar. In 1999, how many Paula violations were there in your place of business? Possession of alcohol under the legal age.
I don't have any idea.
Ballpark?
I have no idea ballpark.
How about 170?
There could have been.
So
Could have
almost
been.
every other day. Has anything changed in there? Because I heard a rumor, and I believe it or not, I have a couple young friends. Not a lot, but I have a few young friends that'll still talk to me. There was a rumor that some of your employees would play a certain kind of music when the police came in to tip off the sorority girls so that they could push their drinks across the table to
and I
somebody
heard it
else.
was a
I've heard
secret
that
society.
happens, but it's
No,
not
it
at
was
Bo
a-
James.
Oh, it's not a Bo James.
No,
Okay, well, I'm
no.
glad we got that
I
cleared up.
think that bad boys, I think I heard.
Isn't a big part of this is we've taken discretion away from local judges. We have mandatory minimum sentencing. But a real good idea I've heard recently is with our budget crunches in the state. We have a Hope House out on the outskirts of Coralville,
Right.
which is presently to close. And I've heard that, well, we've spent a substantial amount of money moving people to Cedar Rapids. And this Hope House could accommodate like 44 people at half the price. And I think we all push counseling and treatment rather than incarceration. I certainly
Absolutely,
do.
we all do.
Leah, let me
But,
ask you this. If the city hadn't passed the alcohol ordinance, would you still be running?
Oh, yeah, I decided 2 years ago that I was probably going to run.
So that
I don't
wasn't
think
your
the
main
alcohol,
motivation.
no, I don't think that had much to do with it. When we didn't have participation 2 years ago, or what I thought was enough participation, I had pretty much made up my mind if we did not have people to vote for besides the incumbents that I thought were qualified or what I would want, that I would probably be running. And I waited until the end to take out my papers to kind of see if people were going to.
Okay. Are you planning on recusing yourself on all alcohol ordinance measures that come up before the council?
I don't know what the law is on it.
Well, what's
I
your
have
gut
no
feeling?
idea
Do you
if
think
there's
as a bar
conflict
and
of
restaurant
interest.
owner you should, or?
Well, you know, it's interesting because, no, I don't think
don't
at all,
think you should.
because no. I think that one of the things that goes along with each of us is our expertise in whatever area. I was on the Police Citizen Review Board for 4 years. I was the only one on the board that dealt with the police on a regular basis, that kind of knew basic operation, you know, kind of what goes on. That can be good and it can be bad, but it's what you can bring with your expertise. I think that, you know, a little bit with having a restaurant bar downtown, obviously it's a major business downtown right now. It's major problems, it's major money coming into our city, it's major effect on the student economy. There's a lot of things involved in it, and I think kind of knowing and understanding that a little bit, and also understanding that I think we are far too overpopulated with restaurants and bars downtown.
How many of you would favor a zoning ordinance to cut down the number of bars allowed in the downtown business district?
We're already looking into it.
Right, the planning and zoning is beginning a little bit of that.
And our request.
I never
Good.
used to favor that, but I think we've gotten every building that closes, it seems like. We're
John,
getting
is that a
into
no?
It's a no at this point, and I'll tell you why. It's not so much that I think we ought to have more bars and restaurants, because I think we have quite a few already. It's the issue to me is that if we were to rezone and some of these businesses started to grandfather out, and we did not, in addition to that, create the kind of economic climate that would allow other kinds of retail to come in, I think we'd end up with empty storefronts.
All right. That's an interesting question. Let me
It's a
just.
good point.
Well, just let me say this.
All right, I got the baloney ready, Ernie.
That's all right.
Because I got my next
One
question
of the
going.
reasons that we have proliferations of bars and restaurants is that many times they believe, right or wrong, that they can afford to pay the rent, and they pay a higher rent than other businesses might. So an ordinance that did restrict the number of liquor licenses within the central business district could have an effect of creating an environment where more businesses might tend to locate, but it would take years, and I mean years, to reduce that number.
Well, we have years. Mike, let me get to you if I could.
Okay.
We're talking about businesses, and Iowa City is working hard to get new businesses to come to Iowa City, right?
That's right.
What sort of tax break would it take to get you to move your business, Brandy's Vacuum, from Coralville to Iowa City?
You know what, Gary? I've had 4 businesses. I had 3 successful businesses in Iowa City. I'm on the downhill slide now. I probably look much
You
younger
don't
than
look
I am.
like on downhill slide to me.
Well, thank you very much. All of my businesses in Iowa City, what we've done is we've slowed down, and we have our easiest business to run right now, and it allows me to do my politics. I had a convenience store on Burlington Street. I had the Mighty Shop.
Mighty Shop.
That's right.
Yeah.
And I had an alcohol license and ran it for about 8 years. I never had one citation for selling to an underage person. And
How often were you checked?
Yeah, but let me ask you.
I was checked quite often.
Can we get you back in? Is there any
You
way we could
betcha.
get you Brandy's downtown?
You betcha.
Okay, I'm
anytime.
hoping for that.
If
And it won't take a tax break.
You know what? We're about to sell a store maybe and do something different in about a year, and we would love to come to Iowa
Well, this
City.
could be a news-breaking story right here.
But you know, Gary, here's another thing. It's been brought up that I do have a business in Coralville. Well, I do, but I service a lot of Iowa City people,
sure
as
you
do
do.
the Iowa City people.
I'm sure you do. Let me ask
And
you
I'm
another
sure we
question.
welcome Coralville people shopping in
Right.
Iowa City.
Let me ask you another question about
Okay.
business and commercial development.
Okay.
You favor the rezoning so that Fairway can come into the property over there
I
on
do.
southeast Streb land there?
I believe I was one of the first ones to come on board on
Well,
that.
let me ask you this. Let's say that gets passed. Show of hands, quickly. How many in favor of getting that rezoned commercial?
Rezone or allow the store?
Yeah.
Oh,
I think there's
two different issues.
It's a different
Absolutely.
issue.
Okay, well, all right, well, let me just ask you this.
All right.
Let's say we allow the store in these 6 acres. And then usually it's my experience with commercial development that once you get a commercial development going, there's pressures for other commercial development. I mean, couldn't you see a time in the next, I don't know, couple years maybe, that the rest of the 50 acres of the Streb Jardine property is, somebody wants to have it zoned commercial?
I would not favor that, Gary.
You would not?
No.
You would not? Do you acknowledge that there would be pressures?
There would be pressures. That's why the Fairway understands it's going to take about 3 acres. And I'm in favor of letting Fairway move into that area. Because I think the east side, with all the rooftops and with the annexation going on up on Rochester and Scott Boulevard, that we're going to need a grocery store on that side of town. Besides that, we have 1,500 people or 1,300 that signed a petition that want it there.
Wait. Didn't 1,600 people sign a petition to get those charter amendments on the ballot?
1599.
Did I miss something?
1599.
Was that it? So let me get this straight right now. 1,300 people signed
That's
a
right.
petition for Fairway, so we get Fairway. 1,600 people signed a petition to get the charter amendments on the ballot, and
Right.
they don't get on. Well, I guess it just depends.
No, it doesn't depend at all. The legal staff advised us that those were not legal to put on the ballot, and that's what we have to go by, Gary.
Okay,
I'm
let me ask
in
you this.
favor of voting on everything, but it first must be legal.
Yeah, how many acres of industrial land do we have in the rest of the city outside of these 50 acres of Streb Jardine land?
We've got 50 there. We've got, I believe, around 40 down at the Aviation Commercial Park.
Are you talking about around the airport?
The airport, yeah.
Yep.
Okay, has that not, aren't there pressures to have that rezoned commercial as well, so that could be developed commercially?
We're always going to have pressures to do that.
Yeah. See,
I think that is a commercial zoning.
yeah, the
it's
whole,
North Airport
isn't Mormon
commercial.
Trek going to be extended
Yes.
in a little path that way
That's
towards
exactly right.
Riverside, and that all is going to be commercial?
That may be
That's right.
industrial as well.
That's going to be a
That's-
mixture
I
out there,
think
and
there's a
that's
mix.
down the road.
Is there any chance, and maybe any of you would like to answer this, is there any chance that the Science Center, which at one time I thought was promised something down that way, is ever going to have a chance to get in there at lower than commercial rates so that we could compete with Coralville with their big attractions like the kids skating rink and the children's museum and all that? I think a Science Center would be absolutely incredible for this town.
So do
I think Science Center would be real cool too. I think that the issue here, and it's an interesting question because I've had somebody call me rather irate about the Fairway thing, who's a progressive kind of person that wants to be very careful about growth, and he wanted to vet me about the Fairway store. And his concern is that if we build Fairway, then the commercial stuff starts to increase pressure for that, and then we'll start evolving some sprawl in that direction. I think those are all very valid questions. I think the other issue, though, is that back, I believe, and maybe you guys that have been around longer than me can clarify this, but the zoning and the existing kind of plan for that part of town, at the time that it was developed, there were grocery stores down there. Now, you didn't think about grocery stores being an issue for the southeast part of town. Now there's not. And so having a grocery store there, I mean, it's just imperative. There's so much residential down there. And so you have to have it. I really doubt that we'll take up all the land we'll ever need for industrial. And in the meantime, if there is some more demand for commercial, it's not going to kill us. The issue was not to try to trigger any kind of sprawl.
I think the issue is not to mix them a lot. That's the issue, because of the big heavy trucks that haul stuff in and out.
And you know, that's a
safety
good
issue.
point too. But I don't know one successful grocery store that's not on a main artery.
How about New Pie downtown on Van Buren and Washington?
You
A very
drive by there
successful.
10 times
I
a
see
day.
you in there.
Absolutely, I like
That's
that
not on a
store.
big, I see all of you in there. That's not a heavily traveled street.
That's an excellent example.
And
No, but
they
it
do a
had-
It's a
tremendous
very
business.
small specialty store, though, too.
To a heck of a volume per
is.
square foot, I'll tell
Well,
you
it
that.
does,
Have
but
you been
I,
in town long enough to know when it was the Big B and the
Big
Me
B,
Too?
yes, yes.
But we did have heavy trucks there.
Oh, we did have Me Too,
Let me
yeah.
ask you this about zoning and things like that. This Iowa Avenue streetscape, I think, is beautiful.
Thank you.
Okay? Kudos to everyone concerned. All right. Now I read that First Christian Church is going to fly away to Coralville on the wings of a dove, and we're going to have more Clark apartments there. God bless him, folks. I mean, he's done, built a lot of apartments, but is that really the best use for that? 2-bedroom apartments with 4 students per apartment right down there on Iowa Avenue in this beautiful streetscape? atmosphere where we'd like to get some more interesting commercial development? What do you, Ernie, you're looking thoughtful.
Gary, I'm not sure that that
No.
isn't a perfectly good use for that property.
Okay.
I think that we would like to see more people living in the downtown area where they don't have to have a car. They can use public transportation, and the zoning in the central business district will require that the first level, or perhaps two, depending on what Clark wants to do, will in fact be commercial. Now, you drive into some of the larger cities, particularly older cities, and you do find a lot of apartments above commercial. I think that is a very appropriate use for that building.
Okay, you know, that's interesting because I'm thinking about the streetscape and the Iowa Writers. Let's just, since we're about halfway through, a little change of pace to relax from the heavy political. Let's ask each of you what's your favorite book in the last 5 years. Mike, why don't you start with you?
Oh, Lord.
Great. I read Titanic.
Titanic?
I love
Okay.
Survive the Savage Sea.
Okay.
I read a lot of books, Gary.
Okay. Leah?
I can't even think on that one.
Can't think on it.
I just said
Well, we
the
can
other
come
day
back
I
to you.
haven't read a book in weeks.
The Bible.
This time.
The Bible.
The Bible, yeah.
Hey, I don't even know the name of it, but it was a great book.
Okay. A great book.
A great book.
A great book. All right. Like, that reminds me of what Nixon said when he was in China in 1971.
I really
Yes,
wish you
this
hadn't
is a
made
great
that
wall.
comparison.
Angela's Ashes was
Right,
another
Yeah,
great
okay.
And that was
John?
I reread everything by Tom Robbins in the last couple of years, and I just, every time I read them, it's a whole new world.
Well, you know, I want to know if I can get in. This is going to be some
Building
shameless
code.
promotion. But I nominated 2 people to be on that Iowa Writers Walk, 2 of my favorite Iowa authors that didn't make it. And I'd like to see some of you folks, maybe after this election campaign, take the time to reread Larry Baker's book, Flamingo Rising, and
Read
Chuck
that.
Miller's
Yep.
books
Right.
of poetry. And I'd like to see those 2 names added to
I
the
like
Iowa
the
Writers
book
Walk.
You
and I
didn't
like
let
the
me answer
movie.
the question. You're just
Oh, I'm sorry.
ignoring me
No,
down
I'm sorry.
here.
I'm
You're-
sorry. It's hard
You're
with the
looking
podium
right
here.
over me.
I'm sorry.
And I don't get
I'm sorry.
to answer
All right,
anything.
what, the book,
I
I'm
just
sorry.
finished reading Postville. That was good.
Okay, thank you. I apologize.
I'm moving
It's
this
hard.
way.
It's hard
I
with
knew
this
that was
podium
gonna
here.
happen.
Okay, we're gonna get to you. Don't worry. We're gonna get to you. Anyway, so I hope we get to see more writers. And now, what about the downtown kiosks? Well, it's kind of interesting that people pick on these kiosks. I have to admit that I like them. I'm probably in the minority.
You want to buy them?
We'll get a deal
But
for you.
not for the price that we paid.
I don't
45,
blame you. I
but you
don't
got to
blame you.
demolish.
But in any event, do the kiosks, are they working the way they're supposed to work? And if not, when are they going to work? And if they're not working, what department is responsible for them not working?
Gary,
Can anybody just give me that?
There was
I
a
can answer that.
manufacturing error in those kiosks.
Right.
It was not our fault. It was not manufactured the way we specified. That is corrected, and we made it accessible to disabled. And I'm heavily involved in the Seats Paratransit Committee and believe in accessibility issues, so it was very important to me. I think they cost too much money, and I'm really glad to hear you say something positive about Iowa Avenue.
I love it.
I think it's
I love it.
fantastic.
Are you kidding me?
It's a collaborative effort with the University of Iowa, and I think it's just outstanding. It was long overdue, but we've been criticized on that.
Leah, you're shaking your head. Are you a critic?
Yeah, I'm a critic. I just had a gal today that comes to town from Cedar Rapids come in. She said, "What on earth happened to that street over there? I lost
Well,
my
the street's
parking."
Where's
still
my
there.
parking?
You know, but well, the parking. We lost a lot of the big problem, I think, downtown, and it looks nice. I'm not saying it doesn't look nice, but I think the big thing that certainly I hear, and I would guess that Connie and Ernie hear is
I don't hear it,
for
actually.
life maybe we'll hear on parking downtown. So I think any time that you take out any sort of street parking, a lot of townspeople come downtown, they just drive around to find a space. They refuse to go
Well,
in
you know
those
what would be a
ramps.
better idea? One of the candidates 4 years ago pitched this idea, and I know Mike liked it, but I haven't heard any more about it, is a little streetcar that would shuttle around all over downtown. I'm waiting for that to be implemented.
They're talking about it.
Really?
Somebody's talking about
Good.
That
that.
came up the other
Connie?
day.
I just want a little
Yeah.
comment on the parking.
Yeah.
My customers, some of them don't like the parking ramps. The new ramp is so well disguised, people don't know it's there. And I pay for their parking, so they love the ramps, and I don't hear them complain. I have a few who won't, but I don't hear people complain. The other problem with downtown parking on the street is I've been a real rebel about refeeding meters, not because I don't want customers to do it, but I sat outside one day, and on Dubuque Street, where we have maybe 30 parking places, 8 of them were owned by businesses, and they were all going out to feed their meters.
Yeah, I know.
Plus the employees.
You know,
all
it's
going
a
out
very
to feed
interesting
the
point,
meters.
Connie, and
So,
it's amazing
I
to
don't
me
get
that people who own downtown businesses
Or work there.
allow their people to park right there in the limited
that's-
spots and allow them to be there all day.
That's a good point, Gary, because we've also been criticized about the new parking ramp, and it is now 50% or over full each day. We just hired a second cashier for it. The Capitol Street ramp is full
Jam-packed.
constantly. And,
Well,
and you know, people complain about going to a ramp and walking a half a block, yet they'll go to Coleridge Mall and park out at the end and walk 2 blocks.
I know. Well, it's...
Well, I'll
it-
complain about that, too.
Anyway, the good news, I don't know if you all read this, but the owner of Shakey's on the Strip is opening that restaurant at Sycamore Mall. I can't remember the name of it.
good.
He said
yeah.
there's too much traffic in Coralville. That's what's happened
Yeah.
already. Ernie?
That's right.
Just 2 comments. First, the council back in the 70s made a decision that downtown property was too valuable for parking lots, surface lots. And of course, downtown has been redesigned since urban renewal. We have put large amounts of parking in structures that is a much more efficient use of it. So, I mean, and I don't think that's going to change. Now, the kiosks, and let me give you a yes and no, real political answer here.
Yeah, good.
The kiosks and that entire
Just gonna get the
streetscape
baloney out.
design was designed by a group of Iowa City citizens, downtown people, university people, townspeople, some staff people, and an architect.
Remember, I like the kiosk.
I know, that's
don't have to
fine, but I
sell
just
me out.
want you to know where they came from.
Yeah. I
They were
know.
presented to the council, we approved them. They will work, the phones obviously are in them, there are maps in there are uses for those
Yes.
kiosks.
Yes.
And the newspapers are using some of the
Right,
vending
they are.
machines.
I-
We cannot, I do not believe, force the papers to use a lottery and be in them.
Right.
But I think that overall, they are not unattractive, but they are expensive.
Well, let's
That's
get to
coming of
something else that's a little controversial. We just had an election on the First Avenue extension, and it passed. I'm just wondering, how many of you would be in favor of establishing some sort of buffer between First Avenue and Hickory Hill Park so that we have less encroachment? Could I see a show of
Oh,
hands
yeah.
on that?
I think that's already been
Yes.
done on the
Okay.
district plan for that area.
District plan.
I think that's
Okay.
But I
right.
think we need to carry that. We need single load streets. We need I'd like to see an 8-foot sidewalk and a buffer zone. I said the other night, Gary, I grew up in that park. The park, I'm a native Iowa City, and I discovered
You
that.
weren't playing Mumbledy Peg out there.
I may have been,
Okay.
but that's an incredibly important park to the area, and we'll take all steps to
And
preserve.
how about having residential construction on only one side?
That's what he said.
Single load
Single.
streets.
Oh, single. I'm sorry. I'm not familiar with
Yeah,
that. Single load.
Single load.
I learned something. Single load. Okay. Well, that's good to hear because I know there's a lot of people
Yeah.
that are still concerned about it. How about allocating some kind of funds to, promote prairie restoration in the park? And because there's, from what I
There is some
understand
prairie
from people
there.
that called me, increasing problem with invasive weeds and so on out there.
I think it's a good idea. We've done that on the peninsula.
I think that's going to be a matter of prioritization in the Parks and Recreation Department. I mean, I think they're going to have to, and we are very, very tight on general fund monies. But they do get a fairly decent budget, but I don't see where the money will come from outside of their budget. So my guess is they'll have to prioritize that within the
I'm glad
department.
to hear about these other concerns about First Avenue. Mike, let me ask you this. We all know that you live on the west side of town in Dick Meyer's area. Are you ready to commit tonight to serve your full 4 years and not run for either his seat or the County Board of Supervisors if it comes up with a vacancy?
Do you know, Gary, there are people that have stepped down from an elected position to run, and I don't criticize them. I will not do that. I
Okay.
believe when you're elected for 4 years, you serve 4 years.
Okay, thank
So
you.
I'm
A
absolutely
straightforward
committed
answer. We don't even have to get the baloney out on that.
Well-
There wasn't any fudge factor
If you
there.
got a knife, bring it up.
After the show. Okay, very good. Connie, I know I haven't...
I'm here.
I know. I was waiting because since Brandon was not here,
Oh, right.
I wanted to do this as fairly as I could. And I remember, there was that little bit of fluff, and I shouldn't say fluff. There was a little bit of a fluff in the newspaper about your late filing and all that, which, you know, I mean, I ran for city council. I understand that these things happen.
It didn't happen.
Oh, it didn't happen. All right, well, hey, then it was a non-story, totally. Well, excuse me. Because I think I was about to say there's a larger issue.
What?
And not just with you, but since, you know, we're talking about campaign spending, and I remember talking to you in a special show 4 years ago.
I remember that. It was so much fun.
Do you remember how
I'd
much?
like another special show.
How much do you remember spending on your '97 campaign?
I don't remember. About 8,000, 7,000?
How about '98-18?
Okay, well, this time I decided to run a very low-key campaign. I already had signs. I didn't plan on doing a brochure, so I didn't collect any money till after the primary.
Well, I remember when I interviewed you 4 years ago, we talked about how this money was going up. You know, that Mike and Ernie and were up there in the 8 to 9 range and in spending 4 years ago. That you would be interested in possibly leading a discussion on campaign finance limits on the council. What are your thoughts tonight?
I think it's a good idea. We do have a limit as to how much you can contribute.
Right, I understand.
I don't know where you draw that figure at, but I'd be willing to talk about that. I don't know. I absolutely don't have any how much money I've raised, but all I've done is send out one postcard mailing. I did another postcard mailing. We ran a few newspapers ads, and any money we have left over, we would run newspaper ads, and the rest we'll give to the Children's Aid Fund at the school district because they're out of money.
Okay. Well, I hope that in some point in time we get to a place where we can have this larger discussion about campaign
It's a valid point.
spending.
I'm a
Maybe
big one on that too. I am very conservative when it comes down to spending money. And I think that, I don't know what mine's going to end up, but possibly around $3,000 or so. I did an initial mailing to people I knew, basically, and checks kind of come in every now and then from people I don't even know, which is nice of them. But I set out a budget, and I'm sticking within that budget, and I think it's just crazy to spend that kind of money myself. But
Well, and I think the problem is this, that if it costs $10,000 to get elected to city council, then you're going to exclude significant parts of the population from being able to even consider running.
Well, as a lawyer, can we do anything legally to put a cap on it?
I think we can. It's a touchy area because you get into First Amendment issues when you tell people they can't spend their money on a candidate, or the candidate can't spend money on his or her effort to get the message out. I think probably the most productive way to go on this is to elicit agreements from candidates that if they participate within the public sphere of campaign finance reform, then the benefits they'll get is access to the airwaves, maybe some money for printing pamphlets, maybe some advertising money, and that would be publicly funded. And the agreement they make then is that they won't go out and generate private funds.
Okay.
I think that's probably the best, most legally sound way to go.
Okay. Kind of getting back to you. You said, I believe, when you voted against the alcohol ordinance, that you were for 21 in the bars.
Right.
Have you introduced a motion to that effect up to this point?
There was no interest on the council, and it's probably just as well because we'd worked so long on this ordinance. But I will bring it up after we look at how effective the present ordinance is. I did not vote for it. I support it. The council voted for it, and I certainly support the current ordinance. And if I'm reelected, I'm definitely going to look at this, whether it's the effectiveness of that ordinance. And if it hasn't been effective, then I'm going to bring up the 21 again, or a new plan, because we simply need to do something with the alcohol problem.
And here's a question from a caller. They'd heard that something was leaking from the old gas and electric coal yard site south of Burlington into Ralston Creek, and then did not hear of any follow-up on this. Is this true, and what became of this issue? Toss up Ernie.
All right. Yes, that is true. And I don't know how many years ago, but this goes back into the 30s, I think. There was a gasification plant there. And as a result, there was some contamination of the soil. When we widened Burlington Street 3 years ago, we're going to replace the box culvert. We discovered, or the Highway Commission discovered this contamination. We sampled the water. There is virtually no leakage of anything out of there. They have said that this contamination is minuscule. It might have been a problem perhaps 50 years ago.
All right.
It
So
is
we're
not
okay.
a problem. We will be removing the contaminated soil when we replace the box culvert, and I think within the next 2 or 3 years.
Okay, well, that's great. Getting back to developers, should anything be required of developers before we give them any sort of tax breaks? Who wants to start on that?
What do you mean by a developer, though? I mean,
Or anything. A person with a project.
There are
some-
things required. There are already
Okay.
things required.
What's required?
The number of jobs, earning, Mike might tell me, with a
Period of time.
period of time, job pay.
Jobs?
Well, yeah, and you have to understand that it's called tax increment financing, and we did that on the Sycamore Mall. We
Right.
watched at one time the Sycamore Mall in this community was worth $13 or $14 million. We watched it deteriorate down to about $4 million, which it was sold at. And this year we've had $5 or $5.5 million in building permits issued. And the catch there, Gary, was if you don't make an improvement, you don't get the tax
no, I
benefit.
understand.
It's like an investment in your city's future.
Yeah, let me ask you this. On programs where we do not get grants from the state to help finance them, are there any requirements for the number of jobs created for either TIFs, the tax increment financing, or abatements?
Gary, I'm not sure that there are a specific number of job requirements. There are requirements that the prospective industry or business makes a projection as to the number of jobs that will occur. They are required to produce that number of jobs. They are required to increase the value of the property by a certain percentage. If they are unable to do those, they do not get the tax incentives. And I think by and large, I think Sycamore Mall is probably not the best example of this, but by and large, the TIFs that we've looked at, I guess all of the TIFs we've looked at, have been for non-competitive industries. I mean,
And is Sycamore Mall the only TIF that we've been?
it's not a TIF, that's an urban renewal area, which we handled differently.
It's tax abatement.
Yeah, it
tax
is.
rebate.
Right, and that's what it is.
Okay.
But the Seabury Smith, the Owens Brockman, some of those NCS, some of those that have had tax incentives in the past have been non-competitive businesses. So we don't give a new business a competitive disadvantage against a already established business.
Well, and
I
it should
think-
be said too on the jobs that you have to maintain that number of jobs
Right.
for a specific number of years.
Should they be a certain wage? Should we require people to pay a living wage?
The
I
thing
don't know what that is.
The thing with TIFs and abatements and all that is that the state law does not set particularly stringent standards for when you can do it or when you can't. The council has said itself on occasion that they can do nearly anything they want in terms of working out some sort of deal. And that's all fine and good, but we don't have, and we need to have in council, some pretty clear-cut policies and standards for when we're going to even open the door to this stuff. We think about jobs, we think about wages, we think about impact on neighborhoods, we think about significant issues about environmental effect, we think about sprawl, and then the big thing you think about is, okay, we're going to give this business some sort of tax advantage. We're not going to lower the city budget in order to accommodate that, and so who's going to pay for the gap? Because
John, let me
No,
just
that's
say,
not-
first of all,
No,
most
that's
of these
exactly
do
how it
not
happens.
require any additional city services. Now, just
Nope.
let me finish. You do a Seabury and Smith, you do an Owens Brockman. The water main is there, the street is there, whatever. So when it comes to city services, the amount of city services are the increase is very small. You are looking at a significant number of people who build in this community, live in this community, spend their money in this community, but the cost of providing city services is pretty minuscule, and they still pay the same taxes they paid before they built the building. And they do have to pay anything for retirement of bonds, special bond issues, and whatever.
I do think you see a shift, though. When you give commercial interest tax advantages and you don't adjust the budget in other ways, then whatever, there is a shift over onto the residential side of it. I mean, nobody's offering me a TIF to stay here. I demand a TIF or I'm moving to Coralville. And nobody's going to do
property doesn't pay for itself anyway.
But you know
Well,
what,
I'm being a little sarcastic, and I don't mean to be mean-spirited about it, but
Got it.
it's
okay.
Well, I'm not, though. I'm not that kind of person. But the fact of the matter is that people are very concerned about this because I think there is a sentiment in the community that says we're getting a little too lenient about this stuff. We're being a little too generous about this stuff. We need to slow down. And I think we also need to realize that there are other ways to attract business that we have to pay attention to. Good schools, good neighborhoods, parks, recreation, cultural opportunities. Those are the things that bring businesses in. And TIFs and things like that, well, I think the Sycamore Mall is a great idea. And I initially was a little skeptical, and I am a firm believer in it. It was infill. Jerry Ambrose is not the kind of business person that's going to say, if you don't give me my benefits, I'm moving to Nevada or something. But in general, I just get the feeling, and I believe that we need to be much more cautious and have much higher standards for what we're doing here.
Commercial and industrial pays 100% on their taxes, and residential pays 54, 56%.
Yep. 56.
56%. And that is substantial, but all the good things you mentioned, John, I agree with totally, and this is how we need to bring them here. We need to increase this tax base.
We've got about 4 minutes left, and I haven't heard anybody throw out a question at anybody else that maybe they brought here tonight to ask one of the other candidates. Does anybody have anything they're just dying to ask one of the other candidates?
I'd like to ask you a question.
The last book, my favorite book of the last 5 years, Middlemarch, which I finally got around to reading by George Eliot, Age of Innocence, Edith Wharton, and Riding in Cars with Boys, which I just read before the movie came out.
Okay, but that wasn't my question.
Oh, sorry. Okay.
Can we expect to see Gary Sanders for council signs in the next 2 years?
That's a very interesting question, Mike, and I'm sorry we're just about out of time. Let me say this.
Good for you.
All right, since nobody has any questions for each other, we had a caller that wanted to know about the Peninsula Project. And does anybody want to try taking a step, just flat out, they had heard that the developer backed out. True or false?
False.
False, okay. Basta. Let's move on to the next one. That's the kind of
Not
question.
yet.
I do have a question, though. And
Not yet.
I would guess the chances are pretty heavy that may not work. But
Not work.
we were just talking about that earlier.
Well, there's no basis
But-
for thinking it won't work.
Well, no, there isn't any basis
Right.
for it. He's
Okay.
still looking for his money.
Okay. John?
yeah, that's my question, and it's. I think we all agree that in hindsight, it was probably a very unfortunate thing that this developer had to ask the city for a guarantee on a loan. When is that loan due, and where is he at with getting his own financing so that we're off the
That's a
hook?
very good question.
I
John.
believe the loan is due in January. I think that's the 6 months. But the loan to him, which the city has guaranteed, is not unlike any other loan that you or I would make. If you owe the bank $500 and it's due in January, there's little or nothing the bank can do to ask you or whatever until that note becomes due.
Sure.
So I know that he is in the process of trying to line up his financing. I was in one of the city offices when he called there last Wednesday. But where he is, I don't know, and realistically, we aren't going to know until the note comes due.
Well, yeah, but surely you would imagine that if he gets it, I mean, he knows that he's on rocky soil here, and surely if he had the loan, we would know.
I would think that's true.
All right, we're going to get out on this. We have about 2 minutes left. I want each of you to say what is, I know this is a tough one, number one issue that you want the viewers to know about before we're out of here, that you're going to fight for when you're on the council. Connie, since I ignored you for much of the time, and I apologize, go.
I'm going to continue to work for neighborhood preservation, all neighborhoods.
All neighborhoods. All right?
Open, accessible, respectful, responsive government that includes the community.
I think that I would like to see council be responsible to the people who elected them and make the kinds of decisions that they were elected to make.
Good one.
Good one.
Leah?
I would like to stop all the bickering and the dividedness of the council.
That might happen in 2 years.
And go right in the middle. It seems we got a right, we got a left, and I think I'd fit just perfect right in that middle to stop it and start moving forward with it.
Which
How would
side?
you do? How would you do that?
Well, I don't know, but I think it needs a new person to do it. We've had 2 years of it now, and I
We
think
sure
2 more
have.
years sounds like kind of a
Well, since you're
nightmare.
running at large, and these two gentlemen on your right and left are the ones, one of which you're trying to replace,
And
Should
two of
we-
the nicest
Yep.
guys
should
in
we
our
Yep.
assume that replacing one of them will
I think
elevate
that
the
might do it.
discourse?
I'm a pretty good
Okay.
consensus builder. I'm not a
Okay.
divider. I
All
think
right.
I do a good job of that.
Mike?
Gary, we need to take steps in this community to relieve the tax burdens off of our citizens. Our water bills are high. It really troubles me hearing and particularly seniors that are leaving this community because it's too expensive to live here. And I want to address that.
All right. Well, I want to thank you all very much. I'm not sure we had as many fireworks as I was hoping for, but at least it wasn't the usual staged canned baloney that I often hear on the other forums. I hope the viewers at home got to call in a few questions. I tried to answer or ask most of them. We'll try to do this again in 2 years when we have our next election. We're all out for tonight. Thank you very much for joining us. See you next time. Bye-bye.
Thank you.